10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, Episode 70. Hey everybody, welcome back. Episode 70 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of the show, and what we try to do is give you a short and concise jazz lesson every single week. And we also give you free copies of a PDF that goes along with this every single week. So make sure you go and grab that at 10minutejazzlesson.com. That's the number 10minutejazzlesson.com. A lot of other really cool stuff over there. So make sure you go and check it out today. So this week's episode is going to be about and featuring the playing of who I think is one of the best saxophone players and best musicians alive today, Chris Potter. I'm sure a lot of you guys have had a lot of experience listening to Chris Potter, witnessing some of the various amazing things that he does that sort of transcend the instrument and transcend what we know as jazz. I think there's a lot to learn from him. And there's actually been a lot of kind of scholarship developed around him on the internet. A lot of people transcribing his solos. There's been a recent movement in the past couple of years where Chris Potter will play solo tunes at clinics, and then the internet kind of jumps all over it, and within a couple of weeks of the audio coming out, these solos are transcribed. And I just think it's a really cool thing. I think that Chris is really rallying a lot of people around sort of reaching that next level and just kind of inspiring some awe in people on some of the things that he can do. And if you've ever met Chris, he's like one of the nicest guys in the world, super down to earth, doesn't think much of himself, which is kind of crazy because, I don't know, like I said, he's kind of like the jazz, I don't want to say robot, but sometimes his technique is so otherworldly that we kind of think about him that way. But just a really genuine guy, very open and amazing person. So just very inspiring. So I wanted to feature him this week. And actually the thing that I'm featuring is off of one of these solo clinic performances that he did. And this is him playing over Cherokee. And if you've never heard this before, one of the coolest things about this performance is that he actually plays Cherokee in 10 keys without stopping. And the improvisation that he features is just amazing. So if you've never checked it out before, just simply go onto YouTube and type in Chris Potter plays Cherokee, and I'm pretty sure this is the first thing that will pop up. So what I did was I grabbed let's see, how many measures is it? It's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 measure segment of his solo over Cherokee. And this is very, very close to the beginning because he's actually playing it in the original key. And I figured that would be the most beneficial for you guys because, 99% of the time you're going to be playing this in the original key and not cycling through all the different keys. So this will be directly applicable to some of the stuff that you're going to be playing over Cherokee. And the nice thing about Cherokee is that it's just a very traditional chord progression with a lot of 2-5-1s, a lot of very traditional harmonic movements in it. So it's a great tune to study because of that. Because if you work on Cherokee, it's going to transfer over to so many of the other things that you're playing. So I think the first thing I'll do is just play the line for you. So go ahead and get the PDF, have it in front of you, and I'm just going to play through the material that I have written out for you, and then we're going to talk about why I have chosen this particular passage from the tune. Just so you know, this actually starts kind of in a weird phrase marking, a weird spot in the phrase, and it's simply just because I like the material that he started playing at this particular bar. I'm not actually going to tell you where it starts. I want you to find where it starts in the progression so that you can apply it. Do a little bit of your own digging and kind of figure out where in the progression this happens. So this is Chris Potter's 9-bar line over Cherokee. right, so let's talk about what makes this line so special. I'm just going to point out certain measures because a lot of it's just kind of standard bebop language, but there are a couple of measures in this that I think are really awesome and very, very informative. The first thing, this is a really broad thing, but if you notice how well Chris Potter actually outlines the chord changes, there's no accompaniment with this. It's just him playing solo. And the beautiful thing about the way that he plays is that you know where the chord changes are at all times. And I've talked about this before, playing a cappella and then making sure that you could convey what the actual changes are by outlining them well enough that you don't actually need accompaniment. So I think that he does a fantastic job of this first and foremost, and that's sort of a broad thing to take away from it. The other thing is just the phrasing, the direction of the lines. It just so perfectly fits what a nicely contoured solo is. And if you check out the rest of the solo, you're going to hear that he's just a master of that. He does it literally the entire time. There's nothing I can pick out that doesn't really work. So those are the first things. Now let's start talking about some specific measures. So the first measure is pretty straightforward bebop language kind of stuff, as well as the second measure. We do see a chromatic approach on beat 1 of the second measure, so we're looking at the D minor chord. He does a chromatic approach to the root, and that's actually going to be a theme that carries through a lot of this line, is that normally we need to have a chord tone on all the strong beats, but he actually starts the second measure on a non-chord tone, on a major 7 over a minor chord, but then quickly he resolves it to the root, which gives us kind of a cool melodic effect there. The rest of the measure is pretty standard D minor stuff. Now let's look at the third measure though. So over the G7 chord, which is the 5 chord going to C. He does this really cool thing utilizing the sharp 5, where in beat 2 he does a triplet that goes from the sharp 5 up to the 13 back to the sharp 5. The reason why we call it the sharp 5 and not the flat 13 is because he's actually using the regular 13 on the chord, right? The natural 13. So he's got this sharp 5 thing going. And then the way he resolves the chord to the 1 chord is by coming down 3, flat 9, 1, 7, which is a very, very common thing to do over a 5 chord. It's like, pretty standard bebop language kind of stuff, but he throws in that nice little sharp 5 thing before that. Now, in the C major measure that follows the G7 chord, the 1 chord here, he does that delayed resolution thing again. So instead of resolving to the E on the C chord, which is what 99% of us would do, he actually comes down and he plays a D sharp first, which is, if you really think about it, kind of a big no-no, right? Like in the world of jazz pedagogy, that's kind of a big no-no. You should resolve to that third, right on beat 1, because that's the resolution point. But Chris kind of shows us that nothing is out of bounds, right? So he delays that resolution by a half of a beat and uses a chromatic approach tone into the third to get there. So the D sharp to the E. I think that that's very, very interesting. Then in the second measure of the C major chord, we see another D sharp to E right on the downbeat. And then he follows that up by using a chromatic passing tone between the 13 and the 5. So on beat 2, he goes 13, flat 13, 5. So more chromaticism. And he's a master of using this chromaticism. If you really want to dig into some chromatic stuff, listen to a lot of Chris Potter and transcribe a lot of Chris Potter, because he just does such a good job with that from all his years of studying the bebop language, which is very important. So the next bar is your pretty standard kind of bebop stuff. He does use a lower neighbor tone from G towards the end of the measure. This is the G minor 7 measure. He uses an F sharp instead of an F natural to achieve more of that chromatic effect. Now, this is a really important measure, the C7 going to F major. The C7 chord is a really, really cool place in this little transcription where he uses a lot of altered tones to get from C major to 1, again, 5 to 1, C7 to F major 7, all right? So let's look at this measure and kind of tear it apart a little bit. He starts on the 7 of the C7 chord, B flat, and then he goes down to the sharp 11, so he goes down to F sharp. Then he plays the third, then he plays the flat 9, which he then resolves to the root of the C7 chord. And then he comes down in a diatonic way. So he's actually stacking all of the altered tones at the beginning of the measure. 7, sharp 11, 3, flat 9. Then he just comes right down. 1, 7, 13, 5. And then actually resolves it to the root of that F major 7 chord. So this is different because a lot of us think that we need to put all of our altered notes as close to the 1 chord as possible. And he's kind of showing us that we can put all the altered tones at the beginning of the 5 chord and then play a diatonic thing at the end of the 5 chord, and that's a completely different sound that we can go for. Most of us will play the diatonic stuff at the beginning of the 5 chord, then move into our altered tones and then resolve it. A completely different way of thinking, but one that is just as valid. All right, so that's a lot of information that I've just kind of thrown at you. I want you to take your time and really go through and analyze this for yourself. And just to note that the full transcription is available online. Steve Neff, who actually I'm going to have on the podcast, it'll either have already been out or be out this following week. I did a great interview with Steve where he talks a lot about this stuff. But Steve is really known for a lot of his transcribing and his reviews and stuff like that. So go find the full transcription and check out. It's just amazing. Even just following along with it while Chris plays is just a really cool thing to do. All right, that's going to about do it for this week. I hope this was helpful. Go out and listen to Chris Potter this week. That's my biggest piece of advice for you. You will definitely learn something, and you will definitely be in awe of his skill as a musician. Hey, I have a request for you guys. In doing these interview podcasts, I came up with kind of a cool idea, or what I hope was kind of a cool idea. I want to interview one of the listeners. We can get on a Skype call. We can talk about sort of where you're at with your development as a jazz musician and maybe where you can go next. So if you're somebody that thinks they could benefit from that and doesn't mind your voice being broadcasted across the entire world, get in touch with me, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com, and let's set that up. That's something that I definitely want to do that I think could help a lot of the other listeners. All right, have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.